Hello.
I never imagined he'd come back for good. When Lucas stood in the doorway that Thursday afternoon, a duffel slung over one shoulder, his jaw set with quiet certainty, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: weightlessness. As if the air had shifted, as if the past few years had been a dream I could now awaken from. His voice was calm when he said it, like he'd been rehearsing the words on the way home. "I'm staying, Mom. Not for a visit. For good." I should have asked why. Should have pressed him about what had gone wrong out there. Jobs, friends, ambitions. But I didn't. I just stepped aside, let him walk past me into the home he had grown up in, and closed the door behind him. He belonged here. That was the strangest part. Most young men at 23 crave movement. Cities, crowds, noise. But Lucas had always been quieter, thoughtful. He would walk into a room and somehow calm it just by being in it. That hadn't changed. The moment he dropped his bag by the stairs, the house felt different, fuller. Less echo. He unpacked slowly over the next few days. Not just clothes but himself. His presence wove into the rhythm of my life without disturbing it. I'd find him sitting in the kitchen in the mornings, bare-chested and barefoot, making coffee like it was his sacred duty. He never asked if I wanted any, he just knew. And somehow, the way he handed me that steaming mug, our fingers brushing for a second too long, always left a whisper of heat trailing up my arm. He smiled more now. Not the wide, careless grins of boyhood, but something softer, quieter. As if he knew things about the world, about people, about pain that he hadn't before. I wondered what he'd seen. What had led him back to me. I wanted to ask, but I was afraid that knowing would break the fragile new thing we were building in silence. We shared more meals than we ever had when he was a teenager. He would cook sometimes, leaning against the counter with a dish towel slung over one shoulder, asking if I remembered the way he used to burn toast. I'd laugh. And he'd smile at the sound like it was something rare and valuable. He watched me in a way that made me forget myself, like he saw not just his mother, but someone else beneath the role I had carried for so long. One night, a power outage caught us in the middle of dinner. The house blinked into darkness just as the rain began to fall, thick and steady. I found the candles in the hallway drawer, and Lucas lit them while I cleared the plates. We ended up in the living room, wrapped in our own blankets, the flickering light casting soft shadows along the walls. The couch felt smaller than I remembered. He was close, closer than I expected. Our arms brushed when he shifted, and I didn't pull away. His body was warm beside mine, grounding, comforting. But the silence between us wasn't the comfortable kind. Held weight, possibility, a strange, invisible thread pulling taut. "You cold?" he asked suddenly. "A little." He didn't hesitate, just reached for the edge of his blanket and draped it over my legs. His arm lingering as it crossed mine. His hand, warm and familiar, settled for a brief moment on my wrist. I looked at him. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't name. Something passed between us then. Not words, not a gesture, just a shift in the air. I turned away, hoping the candlelight would hide the flush in my cheeks. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't move away. I stayed up late after he went to bed, walking from room to room like I'd forgotten where things belonged. I stood in the hallway mirror for too long, brushing my fingertips over my cheek. The skin there still tingled. This wasn't supposed to feel like this. I told myself it was just closeness. Nostalgia. The kind of affection born from years of loving and being loved. But deep down I knew that something had changed. And once something changes, it doesn't change back. The next day we said nothing of it. But something in the way he looked at me while I read the paper, or in the way he handed me the salt across the table, had shifted. Quiet awareness. Question unasked. That night, I heard him moving around in the kitchen long after I'd gone to bed. I crept out, barefoot on the hardwood floors, and found him leaning against the sink, drinking milk straight from the glass like he used to when he was 10. "I couldn't sleep," he said when he noticed me. The storm made everything feel strange. "Yeah," I replied. "I know what you mean." We stood there, the glow from the refrigerator the only light in the room. I wasn't sure why I walked toward him. Maybe I wanted to hug him. Maybe I just needed to touch something real. When I reached out, he didn't step back. Instead, he pulled me close, slowly, deliberately. His arms were around me before I knew it. I rested my head on his shoulder, my hands pressed against his back. It should have felt like comfort. Maternal. Familiar. But it didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of something I couldn't see, something dangerous and thrilling. He didn't speak. Just held me. His hands resting lightly at the small of my back. I stepped away first. Slowly. We should get some sleep, I said, not quite meeting his eyes. He nodded, his mouth parting as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. I turned and walked down the hallway, my pulse loud in my ears, each step feeling both heavy and not enough. In the mirror outside my bedroom, I caught a glimpse of my face. And I didn't recognize the woman looking back. I started waking earlier after that night. Maybe it was the quiet of dawn that helped me think. Or maybe it was the unspoken questions that hovered in the air between Lucas and me. I would rise before the sun, wrap myself in my robe, and sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the house settle around me. He had made a habit of joining me. I never asked him to, but I'd hear his soft footsteps behind me, the click of the screen door, and then he'd sit across from me without a word. We never talked much in those early moments. Just sipped our coffee and watched the world wake up. But even in silence, the space between us hummed with something unspoken. One morning, he brought out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. "Found this in the attic," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Figured we could look through it." I nodded, unsure if I was ready, but I let him open it anyway. He pointed to a photo of the two of us on his 8th birthday. Him missing his front teeth, me with a sunburn and a crooked party hat. He smiled. "You were so young," he said, eyes flicking from the photo to my face. "So were you." He was quiet for a beat. "You still are." The words were too soft to be a compliment and too honest to be ignored. I looked away, pretending to be interested in the next photo. Me holding him as a baby, pressed close against my chest. My arms were thinner then, my smile less practiced. "I don't think I've ever seen you happier than in this one," he murmured, brushing his finger over the image. I wanted to say something, anything, to pull us back to safer ground. But nothing came. Later that week the heater broke. The house chilled quickly, and Lucas insisted I take the guest room with a portable radiator while he fixed things. But when I tried to retreat there that night, I found the door slightly ajar, a folded blanket and pillow resting on the edge of my bed, but no sign of him. I found him asleep on the couch, one arm hanging off the side, a book resting on his chest. Something about the sight stopped me. He looked so young, so peaceful, but there was a tension in his brow, even in sleep. I covered him gently, tucking the blanket around his shoulders. As I leaned in, my fingers brushed his jaw unintentionally, and he stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Mom," he said, groggy. "I didn't mean to wake you," I whispered, backing away. But he reached out, lightly catching my wrist. "It's okay," he said, voice thick with sleep. "You can stay." I hesitated. The hallway behind me felt too far, too cold. So I sat. He shifted, making space, and I sat at the edge of the couch. Close but not quite touching. We sat like that for a while, the silence fragile. Then he reached for my hand. Gently, deliberately. His thumb traced the back of my knuckles, slow and absent-minded, like it was a habit he'd forgotten he never had. "I'm glad I came back," he said suddenly. I turned my head. His face was only inches from mine now. "Me too," I whispered. My voice trembled, and I hated that he heard it. The room felt warmer then. Not because of the blanket or the radiator, but because of something else. Something dangerous. I stood up before it could stretch any further. "You should sleep," I said. He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "Good night, Mom." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Good night, Lucas." I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling, the memory of his fingers still warm against mine. I told myself it was nothing, that it was comfort, love, familiarity. But deep down I knew better. The next day I tried to create distance. I filled the house with noise. Music, phone calls, the vacuum. Lucas noticed, of course. He was always more observant than he let on. "Are you avoiding me?" he asked over lunch. I smiled too quickly. "Don't be silly." He leaned forward. "Then tell me what's going on." "There's nothing going on." "Right," he said, but didn't press. That night I found a note outside my door. Just 3 words. "I'm still here." I didn't respond to the note. I didn't know how. Instead, I folded it into my journal, tucked it between the blank pages like something sacred and slightly dangerous, and told myself it didn't mean anything. He was reminding me he was back, that he cared. That's all. But deep down I knew it meant more. I felt it in the way he watched me the next morning while I made eggs. He stood close, closer than necessary. His fingers brushing mine when he reached for a coffee mug. His skin was warm. His eyes unreadable. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked gently, not looking at me. "No," I said more firmly than I intended. "There's nothing to talk about." He didn't answer. Just nodded and stepped away, letting the space stretch between us like a wound. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It wasn't like the quiet we used to share over coffee or during long walks in the neighborhood. It was heavier now, fraught with meaning and resistance, like we were both trying not to speak aloud the same truth. Later that week, we drove upstate to visit an old hiking trail we used to frequent when he was in high school. It was a crisp afternoon, and the air smelled of pine and old leaves. I hoped the open space would settle things, ground us back to what we used to be. Didn't. We walked in silence for most of the trail. At one point, Lucas reached out to steady me when I stumbled on a rock. His hands caught my waist, firm and instinctive, and for a moment we just stood there. His hands on me, my breath shallow, our eyes locked. Pulled away too quickly. "I'm fine. Are you?" he asked quietly. "Yes." But we both knew I wasn't. That night, after we returned home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, my fingers gripping the edge of the sink. I didn't recognize my own face. Flushed, tired, caught in a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't explain to anyone, not even to myself. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would silence the noise. But around midnight I heard a knock. Hesitant. I opened the door to find Lucas standing there barefoot. His hoodie zipped halfway, his hair a mess. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's late. I just couldn't sleep." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stepped inside carefully, like entering a memory. He didn't sit. Just stood there, looking at me like he was waiting for permission to breathe. "Do you regret me coming back?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, never." "Then why do you act like something's broken?" I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly too tired to stand. "Because I don't know how to be this." His voice was soft. "What is this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "That's the problem." He moved closer, slowly, carefully. Then he knelt beside me like he used to when he was a boy and had something important to say. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "You're not. Then why do you look like you're trying not to feel anything at all?" I didn't have an answer. He reached up, one hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. It wasn't a bold touch. It was reverent, cautious, but it made my breath catch. And then, without asking, he leaned in and pressed his lips to my forehead. It wasn't just affection. It wasn't the kind of kiss a son gives his mother out of obligation or habit. It was soft, measured, full of unspoken things. Froze. He pulled away almost immediately, eyes searching mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "That was too much." I didn't speak. Couldn't. He nodded and stood. "Good night, Mom." And then he left. I sat there long after he was gone, the imprint of his lips burning like a secret on my skin. The next morning I found the world unchanged. The sky was still a pale gray, coffee still brewed the same way, and Lucas still sat at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. But everything had. And we both knew it. "Morning," he said, like we hadn't crossed some quiet threshold in the dark hours of the night. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. We didn't speak of the kiss. We didn't need to. It sat between us like a stone, weighty and unmovable, but neither of us dared touch it. That day I kept myself busy. I rearranged the hall closet, washed linens that didn't need washing, reorganized the spice rack. Anything to keep my hands moving and my thoughts in check. Lucas left in the afternoon, claiming he needed some air. I watched him walk down the street from the upstairs window. His figure tall and certain, like a man carrying questions too big for his age. I knew that look. I'd worn it once myself. When he came home that evening, there was something different in his eyes. Not distance, just clarity. He wasn't avoiding anything anymore. He was choosing silence on purpose. So was I. We moved through the days like that. Talking about the little things, grocery lists, movie recommendations, the weather. But never about that night. The silence between us softened again. Not because the tension was gone, but because we'd agreed without words to let it be. Still, there were moments. Like when I passed him a bowl of salad at dinner, and his fingers grazed mine a second too long. Or when he stood behind me at the sink. His presence close enough to feel, but not close enough to touch. These little pulses of awareness ran through me, and each time I caught my breath, I wondered if he noticed. One afternoon, I tripped on the garden path while pruning the lavender. Lucas was beside me in seconds, helping me up, his hands gentle on my arms. "You okay?" he asked, worry knitting his brow. "Just startled," I murmured. But I was lying. It wasn't the fall that had shaken me. It was the way his hands lingered just a moment too long, the way he looked at me like I was something fragile and rare. He pulled me into a hug then. A real one. One that folded me into him, arms tight around my shoulders, his chin resting gently on my head. I stayed there longer than I should have, letting the warmth of him fill the spaces I'd forgotten were empty. "I've got you," he whispered. I almost believed him. That night, I stood in the doorway of his room. He was reading, the light soft and golden behind him. He looked up, surprised to see me. "I was just about to turn in," he said. I nodded, unsure why I'd come. I wanted to say good night." He set the book aside, sitting up straighter. "You sure that's all?" "No," I admitted, stepping inside. "But I don't know what else to say." He looked at me then, really looked. And for a moment, I wanted to step forward, to hold him again, to tell him that something inside me had changed the night he came back. But I didn't. Couldn't. Instead, I knelt beside him like he had done by my bed days before, and placed a kiss on his cheek. Quiet. Final. "I'm glad you're here," I said. His eyes shimmered, but he nodded. "Me too." Understood. He didn't stop me. In my room, I lay in the dark, thinking of all the ways love wears disguises. How sometimes it shows up as a need you can't name. Comfort you try to explain. Attention you pretend not to feel. Lucas was home. That was enough. Maybe it had to be.
Bye.